The sky above Cadia was breaking, not in the way of a storm or a rift in the weather, but as if the heavens themselves had been torn open, their bones laid bare. The eye of terror pulsed in the void, a malignant wound in reality, spilling its poison light across the surface of the fortress world. Stars that had burned for 1 billion years flickered like dying embers, their light weak against the unnatural glow of the warp. Beneath that fractured firmament, the cities of Cadia stood defiant and dying. It is here, in this twilight between glory and annihilation, that our tale begins. Before we march into the heart of this tragedy, let me tell you something. I truly care about you, more than you might expect from a voice telling you stories of war and ruin. These words, though heavy with ash and steel, are meant to keep you company through the long night. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now grab your coffee and let's get started. The fortress of Casa Myrak loomed like a black crown against the horizon, its spires jagged and unyielding. Banners once vibrant with imperial sigils now hung torn and scorched, their edges flapping in the hot winds from distant bombardments. At the highest parapet, Commander Rael Varus stood in silence, his eyes locked on the blood-hued auroras dancing in the upper atmosphere. They called him immortal. None dared to speak why. The veterans whispered of old wounds that should have killed him, of wars fought centuries past, where his face had not aged a day. To the Cadian youth under his command, he was simply the commander, a figure as permanent as the walls they defended. But to Varus, every sunrise was a wound, every year another weight pressing down upon a soul that had long ceased to feel lightness. He gripped the stone balustrade until cracks split the ancient masonry. From here, the thunder of battle was distant, softened by miles of wall and steel, but the tremors beneath his boots betrayed the truth. The enemy was pressing in. For days the air had tasted of ozone and blood. For days the screams had been carried on the wind. And yet he knew this was only the beginning. Footsteps approached behind him, sharp against the stone. "Commander," came the voice of Lieutenant Kira Dawn, young, eager, and far too untested for the fires she had been thrown into. "The eastern bulwark reports movement in the dust clouds. Could be another probing force, could be the real push." Varus did not turn at once. He kept his gaze fixed on the eye's pulsing light, as if trying to divine its intent. "It will not be a probe," he said at last. "They have tested our walls enough. This will be a knife to the heart." Kira hesitated, her hands tightening on the data slate she carried. "Then we should call the reserves, sir." His eyes flicked to her. She was trying to hide the fear, but he could see it in the tightness around her mouth. He had seen that same look on countless faces across countless lifetimes, moments before the storm broke. "Not yet," he said. "Once we move them, we show our hand. Let them believe us weaker than we are. Let them overreach." She looked ready to argue, but discipline won over impulse. With a sharp nod, she stepped back, waiting for dismissal. Instead, Varus turned his gaze back to the horizon. The dust clouds there were not natural. They twisted in strange, almost deliberate patterns, moving against the prevailing winds. Somewhere beyond them, engines growled, weapons charged, and the heretic banners of Abaddon's war host caught the light. Varus closed his eyes briefly. The visions would come soon. They always came before great battles. Faces from the past, voices from beyond the veil, a presence in the shadows whispering of escape and survival. He had ignored them for years, but the whispers had grown louder since the first shells fell on Cadia. When he opened his eyes again, The wind had shifted. A faint tang of iron carried with it a memory. The siege of Calthis Reach, 300 years ago, when he had made the pact that would chain him to life without end. He had been dying then, lungs punctured, blood filling his mouth, when the figure had come. A silhouette wrapped in starlight, offering breath when all breath had fled, in exchange for service to a cause he had already sworn to. It had seemed no bargain at all, but immortality had its own teeth. A Vox signal broke the memory. Harsh, clipped. Contact at the eastern wall, enemy armor advancing in formation. Varus straightened, the years vanishing from his bearing, if not from his soul. "Sound the guns," he ordered. "Let them come. Cadia will answer." The eastern wall lit with the fire of 1,000 heavy emplacements, the roar echoing across the plain. From the parapet, Varus watched the horizon blossom with explosions, the dust clouds torn apart to reveal the black and gold armor of Chaos Land raiders, flanked by swarms of twisted infantry. Beside him, Kira's knuckles whitened around her data slate. "Sir, there's more than we thought." "There always is," he said. And in the back of his mind, the whisper came again, velvet and cold. "You can survive this. All you need do is let go." Varus gritted his teeth and turned from the whisper, focusing instead on the shapes in the distance and the promise he had made long ago. Cadia would not fall while he still drew breath, but even immortals have limits. The chapter closes with the enemy charge slamming into the Cadian lines, the night above split by the screaming fire of orbital guns. Varus stands at the parapet, framed in the dying light, knowing this will not be the last time the whispers will come, and fearing the moment he might answer them. The guns roared through the night, their flashes turning the fortress walls into jagged silhouettes against the hell-lit horizon. The air was a ceaseless churn of dust, smoke, and ozone. Hours passed in the rhythm of war. Fire, reload, brace, fire again, until the great charge of the eastern wall was broken on the teeth of Cadia's defences. The Cadian dead were carried to the lower vaults, where they would be given the rights of the emperor before being returned to the soil of their home. The enemy dead, what little remained of them, were left to rot beneath the shattered causeways. Commander Rael Varus descended from the parapet only when the last gun fell silent. His boots echoed along the cold, narrow corridors of Casa Mirak's command bastion. Officers saluted as he passed, their faces smeared with ash, eyes ringed in fatigue. None dared speak to him unless spoken to, not because of fear of his rank, but because of something older, heavier, unspoken. Lieutenant Kira Dawn waited at the threshold to the war room, posture stiff despite the exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin. "Sir, the rival officer, Colonel Redden, is demanding we commit the reserves now. He says—" "I know what Redden says," Varus interrupted, brushing past her into the chamber. The room was a circle of dim hololith projectors, casting green light over the map of Cadia's embattled surface. Redden stood opposite him, a broad-shouldered man with eyes like dull iron and a voice that carried even in a whisper. "Varus, every hour you hold the reserves is another hour we bleed men at the outer lines. You saw the size of that push tonight. They're massing for more." Varus's gaze swept the map, ignoring the man for a moment. "We give the enemy what they expect, Colonel, and they will take it gladly. I'll not empty the last wall so you can feel bold for a few hours." "You speak like someone with centuries to wait," Raiden snapped. The words landed heavier than Redden could have known, but Varus's expression did not change. "This council is over." Redden's jaw tightened, but he turned sharply and left. Only Kira remained, standing in the doorway, Sir, what he said. Varus moved to the viewport, watching the faint glimmer of enemy camps beyond the killing fields. There are truths in this galaxy, Lieutenant, that can never be spoken aloud. The fewer who know them, the better they sleep. She didn't answer, but she didn't leave either. Sir, I've heard the stories about you, that you fought in the second siege of Cultist Reach. That was 290 years ago. He turned then, studying her. She didn't flinch under his gaze. Brave girl, foolish girl. They're just stories, he said, and yet the words felt thin, hollow. That night, sleep did not come easily. When it did, it brought with it the memories he could never bury. The heat had been unbearable on Cultist Reach, the air thick with dust from the shattered moons above. The fortress walls had been crumbling for weeks, chaos engines tearing them apart brick by brick. Varus had been a younger man then, flesh and blood mortal like any other, bleeding from a wound in his side that no medici could staunch. The pain was a constant drumbeat, each thud a reminder that the end was closing in. He had been left alone in the ruins of a command post, the rest of his company already dead or dying. That was when the shadows lengthened, not from the sun, but from something else, something that bled darkness into the light. The figure that emerged was unlike anything he had seen, not demon, not man, but something caught between. A being wrapped in fragments of starlight and void, its face hidden behind a helm of black glass. You are dying, it had said, the voice neither male nor female, but an echo that seemed to come from inside his bones. I've been dying for weeks, he had spat back, though his voice was weak. I can end it, the figure continued, or I can postpone it. You are a weapon the Imperium still needs. I can keep you sharp, unbroken, eternal. And what would that cost me, he had asked, though he already knew there would be a price. The figure had stepped closer, and even in his fever haze, he had seen the faint shimmer of chains, not physical, but made of something deeper, binding it to a will beyond its own. Your life, it said simply. You will give it to me, and in return, I will ensure it never runs out. Desperation and duty had warred in him. His world was falling, but if he could live, if he could fight, maybe he could tip the scales. And so, he had taken the bargain. The pain had left him in an instant. Breath had filled his lungs. His wound had closed as if it had never been. And when he rose, the figure was gone. But the chains remained, coiled around his soul, unseen by any but him. Varus woke with the taste of that dust still in his mouth, the whisper curling at the edges of his mind. You will not survive Cadia without me. He dressed in silence and made his way to the parapet. The night was still, save for the distant growl of enemy engines. He found Kira there, her eyes on the horizon. Couldn't sleep, she said without turning. Sleep is for those who believe they'll see another dawn, he answered. She glanced at him then, her voice careful. I think there's more to you than you let us see. He met her gaze, but said nothing. Far in the distance, the first tracer rounds of the next assault lit the darkness. The weight of immortality is not the weight of years, but the weight of endless witnessing. Commander Rael Varus knew this better than any living soul. The war room of Casimirak was quiet now, the hololith maps dimmed to a ghostly glow. Outside, the shattered city of Cadia slumbered fitfully beneath a blanket of ash and the distant thunder of siege engines. Inside, Varus sat alone, fingers clasped tightly over a scarred table, eyes hollow yet burning with a tired fire. Lieutenant Kira Dawn's voice disturbed the silence. Sir, You should rest. He shook his head slowly. Rest is a luxury for those who do not remember the faces that vanish. She took a cautious step closer, then sat across from him. Tell me, what is it like to live so long, to see so many die? He looked away, gaze drifting to a mural depicting the Emperor's triumph over the forces of chaos. A frozen moment of glory, bright and eternal. It is a slow death, he said quietly. 1,000 small deaths. Every friend, every comrade, every world I have known, lost to time or fire. And I remain. Kira swallowed, suddenly feeling the crushing enormity of his burden. How do you keep going? He smiled, but it was a shadow of something once warm. I don't. Not always. The door hissed open, and Commissar Janelle Marek entered, her presence like a cold wind cutting through the warmth of the room. Her uniform was immaculate, her eyes sharp as a blade. Commander, orders from High Command. Reinforcements from the Ultima Segmentum will arrive within the fortnight. Until then, we hold. Varys nodded. Good. We will need every soul. She lingered a moment, then said, There are rumors, sir. Whispers that the enemy has infiltrators, that not all who wear Cadian colours can be trusted. He met her gaze, tired but resolute. Paranoia is a blade that cuts both ways, Commissar. Yet sometimes the blade finds truth. The tension hung heavy as she left. Varys leaned back, his mind turning over shadows. The war was not just without, it had seeded poison within. In the weeks that followed, the fragile bonds holding the defenders together began to fray. Lieutenant Kira, once hopeful and steadfast, found herself torn between admiration and doubt of her commander. The secret of his immortality gnawed at her, unearthed by whispered conversations and furtive glances. How could a man who never aged lead men who would surely die? Was he a beacon of hope, or a ghost of what should have passed? Colonel Redden's influence grew, subtle and unrelenting. He rallied officers who questioned Varys's judgment, sowed discord in council meetings, and pressed for harsher measures. His charisma was a blade cloaked in silk, persuasive, but sharp enough to draw blood. The Commissar Janelle watched this unfolding war of wills with a detached, calculating eye. Duty to the Emperor demanded order, but order was brittle when cracked by suspicion and fear. One evening, Varys found himself alone with Kira in the armory hall. The walls echoed with the distant hum of machinery and the clang of armor being prepared. You must understand, Varys said, voice low. My immortality is not a gift. It is a chain. She looked at him, eyes wide and searching. Then why do you keep fighting? Because even chains can be broken, he answered. Because even I do not know if I am still the man I was, or something else. Because if I stop fighting, I become less than a ghost. I become a warning. She hesitated, then placed a tentative hand on his arm. You are not alone. In that touch was a fragile hope, a small rebellion against the tide of despair that threatened to drown them all. But the darkness was relentless. News came of sabotage, a critical ammunition supply destroyed in the dead of night. Fingers pointed, accusations whispered. Colonel Redden's faction grew louder, calling for martial law. The commander's hold over the garrison slipped, the weight of centuries now a burden of imminent collapse. Late one night, Varys found himself once again staring into the void of the sky. The eye of terror churned, its sickly green hues bleeding into the stars, a cruel mirror of his own fractured soul. A whisper stirred, faint, seductive, and unbearably familiar. You do not have to bear this alone. He closed his eyes, the promise both a balm and a poison. The war outside raged on, But inside, the battle for the soul of Cadia had only just begun. The walls of Casamiric had held for weeks, but cracks ran deeper than stone and steel. Beneath the surface of Cadia's shattered streets, something far more fragile was breaking apart, the unity of those sworn to defend it. Commander Rael Varras stood in the command chamber, eyes narrowing at the hololith map where red markers flickered like bleeding wounds across the fortress. Reports came in fragmented. A turret inexplicably silenced, an ammo depot destroyed from within, patrols ambushed by traitors cloaked in imperial colours. Each failure struck like a chisel against the bedrock of morale. Lieutenant Kira Dawn approached swiftly, her face pale but determined. "Sir, the Eastern Heavy Battery has gone offline. Preliminary scans suggest sabotage. We're still assessing damage." Varus's jaw clenched. "Sabotage," he repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. "How deep does this rot go?" Before she could answer, Colonel Redden entered, his steps measured, voice cool but laced with accusation. "If I may, Commander, it appears the enemy's claws reach farther than we feared. Perhaps it is time to consider the loyalty of those around us." The room fell silent. Eyes flicked to Varus, waiting for his judgment. He met Redden's gaze, unflinching. "Loyalty is earned, Colonel, not assumed." Redden's lips curled. "And yet," he said, voice dropping, "blind trust is the surest path to ruin." Kira stepped between them, voice steady despite the tension. "We need to find the traitors, not tear each other apart." Varus raised a hand, silencing further debate. "Agreed. Commissar Marek will lead an inquiry. No one is above suspicion, not even me." That night, the fortress pulsed with paranoia. Guards watched each other with wary eyes. Whispers twisted through corridors like poison. The very stones seemed to harbour secrets, cold and unyielding. In his quarters, Varus stared at a fractured obsidian amulet hanging from his neck, a relic from the pact that bound him to unending life. It was a reminder that immortality came not as a blessing, but a sentence. The faces of the fallen haunted him. Friends, lovers, soldiers who had died defending this world he could not leave. The weight pressed heavy. Could he trust anyone anymore? A sudden summons pulled him from his thoughts. Commissar Marek awaited in the interrogation chamber, her expression unreadable beneath the harsh lights. "There's more than sabotage," she said quietly. "Something darker. I've found evidence of warp taint, a corruption growing inside the fortress." Varus's breath caught. Warp taint was the corruption of souls, the whisper of chaos bleeding into flesh and mind. If true, Cadia's fall was no longer just a siege by steel and fire, but a war for the very essence of its defenders. "Find the source," he ordered, "and burn it out." As Marek left, Varus felt the crushing loneliness of command. The fortress was crumbling not just around them, but within. The enemy was no longer just outside the walls. It had found a way inside. Outside, a storm brewed, lightning splitting the sky as if the heavens themselves were breaking apart. Cadia's fate hung in that storm, fragile and uncertain, as cracks widened in stone, in loyalty, and in the soul of a world. The darkness in Casamiric was deeper than the endless void beyond Cadia's shattered skies. It seeped through the stone corridors and whispered behind closed doors, carried on breaths and murmurs no one dared speak aloud. Commander Rael Varras stood alone in the shadowed observatory, the ancient optics trained toward the eye of terror. The sickly green glow cast ghostly shapes across his weathered face, the flickering light reflecting the torment within. He could feel it stirring, a presence long familiar, slipping through the warp storms like a cold knife through flesh. The vision came again, sharper than before. The figure from Cultist Reach, draped in starfire and shadow, its voice a sibilant echo that promised salvation and ruin in the same breath. You need not endure this alone. The end is not fixed. I offer escape, power, a future beyond ruin. Varas clenched his fists, heart pounding as the temptation clawed at the edges of his mind. Immortality had been a curse, but now the promise was of something more, a way to bend fate itself. But what was the price? The door hissed open. Lieutenant Kira Dawn stepped inside, eyes wide but resolute. Commander, the situation worsens. The sabotage was just the beginning. Reports confirm warp taint spreading among the garrison. Some men are changing. Varys turned, pain etched deep in his gaze. How many? Too many. Commissar Marek is leading purges, but it's a losing battle. He sighed, the weight of centuries pressing down. This war is no longer for territory or honor. It is for the soul of Cadia itself. Kira hesitated, then asked quietly, "Have you ever faced this before?" The warp's shadow creeping inside. Varys looked away, the memory bitter and raw. At Cultist Reach, I saw what it does to men, what it does to me. He told her then of the pact, the figure who had saved his life at the cost of his soul's chains, the immortality that was as much prison as gift. Kira listened without judgment, her eyes reflecting the flickering hololiths. We must hold fast, Varys concluded, voice heavy. But we must be vigilant. The enemy is not only without, but within. As she left, the commander returned to the observatory window, staring into the eyes-shifting depths. The whispers grew louder, promising deliverance if only he would surrender. He turned away, voice low but resolute. I am Cadia's shield. I will not break. Yet beneath his steadfast words, a shadow stirred, the slow erosion of hope beneath the weight of endless war. Commander Rael Varys entered the war room with the quiet weight of a man who bore centuries of burden. The chamber was a grim arena, its circular walls adorned with battle honours faded by time and soot. Around the central hololith map sat the last council of Casa Mirak's defenders. Lieutenant Kira Dawn, Commissar Janelle Marek, Colonel Redden, and a handful of officers who wore exhaustion as a second skin. The storm outside raged in tandem with the tensions within, thunder rolling as if the very heavens condemned their fate. Varys's gaze swept the room, noting every sharpened glance and clenched jaw. The recent acts of sabotage and the spread of warp taint had frayed nerves and loyalties alike. Every word spoken tonight would carve the future of Cadia. He broke the silence, voice steady but carrying the weight of command. Our walls have held, but the enemy's siege tightens. Reports confirm deeper corruption within our ranks. We face threats from without and within. This council must unite or fall divided. Colonel Redden's voice cut in, cold and sharp. Unity requires truth, Commander. If we are to root out traitors and heretics, none must be above suspicion, including you. Murmurs flickered among the officers. Kira's eyes widened, and even Commissar Marek's posture stiffened. Varys's gaze locked on Raiden. I have borne this fight for centuries. My loyalty is as sure as the stones beneath our feet. Centuries. Redden's smirk was bitter. Some say you are more spectre than man. How can we trust one who does not age while we bleed and die? A ripple of unease spread. Kira bit her lip, and Marek's eyes narrowed with unreadable thoughts. Varys's voice deepened. I have taken a burden none should bear to defend this world. If you doubt me, then you doubt Cadia itself. The room fell into a tense silence. Commissar Marrick's tone was measured but firm. "Commander, orders from High Command demand we prepare for the worst. If Cadia falls, the fortress must be destroyed to deny it to the enemy." Gasps and grim nods met her words. Varus exhaled slowly, knowing the sacrifice demanded was near. Kira stepped forward, her voice breaking through the weighty gloom. "We still have a choice, to stand together or be torn apart by fear." Reden's glare did not waver. Choice fades when betrayal walks among us. The meeting fractured, accusations thrown like blades, and loyalty questioned in hushed tones. As the council disbanded, Varus lingered by the viewport, watching the storm crack the sky in violent arcs. He whispered to the void, "The fortress cracks. So do we all." The night closed in, heavy with doubt, and the knowledge that Cadia's fate hung precariously on the edge of a blade. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning promethium and the distant wails of dying machines. Casa Merak's outer defences had begun to buckle under the relentless hammer of the enemy. Chaos War engines, twisted and warped by the energies of the warp, bore down upon the shattered walls, their iron fists crushing stone and spirit alike. Commander Rael Varus stood at the forefront of the command deck, his figure a dark silhouette against the chaotic vista beyond the viewport. The Eye of Terror loomed above, a swirling vortex of malevolent light that seemed to mock the defenders below with its eternal, unyielding presence. Beside him, Lieutenant Kira Dawn's hands trembled as she relayed reports. "Sir, enemy boarding parties have breached the Eastern Gate. Resistance is fierce, but they're pushing inward fast." Varus's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing with cold determination. "Hold the line. No ground is to be given." From the shadowed corners of the room, Colonel Redden watched silently, his expression unreadable, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The tension between him and Varus had become a silent war unto itself. Loyalties questioned, motives veiled in shadow. Outside, the assault tore through the fortress like a storm unbound. Explosions rocked the walls. The very foundations shuddered beneath the fury. Yet amid the chaos, a deeper battle raged. The fragile bonds between men were tested as fear, suspicion, and betrayal wormed their way into hearts already weighed down by endless conflict. In the midst of the turmoil, Commissar Janelle Marrick strode through the ranks, her voice cutting through panic like a blade. "Stand fast, for the Emperor, for Cadia." Varus turned from the viewport, his gaze meeting Kira's. "They do not fight for glory. They fight because they must. We are the shield between light and darkness." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "But even shields can break." The commander's eyes flickered with the ghost of a smile, bitter, knowing. "Then we shall forge new ones from the ashes." Suddenly alarms blared, red lights flooding the chamber. "Commander," a Vox officer shouted. "Incoming. Transmission from the field. Lieutenant Vaughan reports a traitor among the ranks. One who sabotaged the Eastern Gate defenses." Varus's expression darkened. "Prepare an escort. I want this traitor found and brought to me." As the transmission ended, the Eye of Terror cast a sinister glow over the battered fortress, a constant reminder that the war was far from over. The siege was not merely one of stone and steel, but of trust and conviction. And in the heart of Cadia, Commander Varus grappled with a deeper battle, the siege upon his own soul. The corridors of Casa Merak were swallowed by darkness, pierced only by the flickering light of emergency lamps and the distant echoes of gunfire. The fortress had become a labyrinth of shadows and suspicion, where every whispered step might herald salvation or doom. Commander Rael Varras moved swiftly, guided by grim reports and the cold weight of inevitability. The name that haunted the garrison's lips was Lieutenant Vaughan, once a trusted officer, now accused of sabotage and treachery. In the dim glow of the interrogation chamber, Vaughan sat shackled, his face pale but defiant. "You have no proof," he spat, eyes burning with a mixture of fear and rage. Varus regarded him silently, the sentries behind his gaze like a stone wall. "The eastern gate fell because of your actions." Vaughan's laugh was bitter. "You think this war is so simple, that there are only enemies without and friends within. You don't understand what's coming." "What is coming?" Varus asked, voice low. "The warp," Vaughan whispered, voice trembling. "It's already inside. It twists us, turns brother against brother. Your immortality won't save you then." Lieutenant Kira Dawn stood nearby, her face pale but resolute. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Vaughan had been one of their own, a mentor to some, a friend to others. Varus's eyes met hers. Trust is a fragile thing. Once broken, it is hard to mend. The interrogations revealed a web of corruption. Warp-tainted cultists hidden among the defenders, their allegiance sworn not to the Emperor, but to the darkness beyond. The fortress was bleeding from within, and every purge left scars deeper than the wounds inflicted by enemy fire. Yet, amidst the despair, a spark remained. Kira approached Varus in the silent aftermath, her voice trembling with urgency. "There's something you must see." She led him to a secluded chamber, where hololiths flickered with encrypted transmissions intercepted from the enemy. The images revealed an ancient symbol, a twisted glyph that pulsed with corrupt energy, the mark of a long-forgotten cult devoted to the ruinous powers. Varus's hand clenched into a fist. "The enemy's shadows reach into the very heart of our fortress. We face not just invasion, but annihilation of our souls." Kira nodded, her eyes steeling. "We must root out the corruption before it consumes us all." But as they stood together, the whispered promise of the pact stirred again within Varus's mind. A tempting voice urging him toward a dark choice, a final escape from the endless torment. He pushed the thought aside. For Cadia, for those who still believed, the fortress might fracture, but the spirit of its defenders would not yield, not while even one breath remained. The relentless thunder of war battered Casa Myrak's battered walls, shaking the fortress to its core. Outside, the forces of chaos surged forward like a tide of darkness, their corrupted engines grinding stone and steel into dust. Within, the defenders clung desperately to the remnants of hope, their spirits tested by treachery and exhaustion. Commander Rael Varras stood amidst the command chamber, eyes burning with a fire born of centuries of sacrifice. The eastern gates, once bastions of Cadia's might, now lay broken, a gaping wound in the fortress's defences. The traitors' sabotage had shattered their strength, and the enemy poured through the breach with unholy fervour. Lieutenant Kira Dawn, her armour scuffed and bloodied, reported from the front lines, voice strained but unwavering. "Sir, the enemy floods the breach. Our lines falter. We cannot hold much longer." Varus's hand clenched into a fist, knuckles white. "Hold the line, no matter the cost. Cadia does not fall today." The council's fragile unity fractured further as Colonel Reedon's accusations echoed through the chamber. This could have been prevented. The commander's hesitation, his secrets, have cost us dearly. Varus turned to him, eyes cold as winter's steel. My secrets have kept this fortress standing longer than your bravado ever could." The clash of wills was interrupted by the shrill alarms signaling the enemy's final push. Explosions rocked the halls as chaos forces poured in, spilling like a flood over the shattered stones. Commissar Janelle Marek rallied the defenders with unyielding resolve. For the Emperor, for Cadia, stand fast. But even her fierce cries could not stem the tide. Soldiers fell, comrades torn apart by claws both physical and spiritual. The fortress groaned, ancient stone cracking beneath the strain. In the midst of chaos, Varus confronted the bitter truth. Cadia's walls, no matter how strong, were mortal. So too were its defenders. Yet amidst the ruin, a flicker of defiance burned bright. Kira met Varus's gaze, voice steady. "We fight, not because we will survive, but because we must." He nodded, the weight of endless years settling on his shoulders. "Then let this day be remembered, not as our end, but as the moment we stood against oblivion." As the gates finally fell, the eye of terror loomed overhead, a swirling tempest of doom and despair. The fall of Cadia was not just the loss of a fortress, it was the shattering of a shield that had guarded humanity's fragile light. And yet, within the ashes, the story of sacrifice, betrayal, and unyielding hope was far from over. The bitter scent of burning promethium clung to the air like a suffocating shroud as Casa Mirak smouldered beneath the jaundiced light of a dying sun. The great fortress, once a bastion of unwavering strength, now lay fractured, its bones cracked and bleeding, its heart a wound that throbbed with every desperate breath of its defenders. Commander Rael Varus stood alone amid the ruin, his silhouette sharp against the flickering hololiths that projected the remnants of the battlefield. The traitors' betrayal had torn through their ranks like a plague, and the siege had become not only a war against an external enemy, but a descent into shadowed bargains and whispered deals. A presence stirred behind him, soft as the hiss of air through shattered stone. Lieutenant Kira Dawn's voice was cautious yet resolute. "Sir, there is a message, an offer from beyond, from the very darkness we fight to repel." Varus turned slowly, the centuries of his burden etching deep lines across his face. "Speak." The hololith flickered to life, revealing a figure cloaked in shimmering black, features obscured beneath a helm of void glass. The envoy's voice was a serpent's whisper, coaxing and cold. "Commander Varus, bearer of the Eternal Pact, you stand at a crossroads. Your fortress crumbles. Your allies falter. The price of survival is high, but not insurmountable." Varus's gaze narrowed. "And what price do you demand?" The envoy's smile was a slash of darkness. Power beyond reckoning, an eternity unshackled by mortal chains. But in exchange, a sacrifice. Your oath to the Emperor, your soul laid bare to the currents of the warp. A heavy silence settled. The promise was intoxicating, an escape from endless war and decay, a chance to tip the scales in Cadia's favor. Yet beneath it lay a deeper abyss, a step toward damnation. Kira's hand brushed Varus's arm, grounding him. "What will you do, Commander?" He closed his eyes, the memories of centuries flickering like dying stars. The lives lost, the endless betrayals, the chains of his immortality. The whispered voice within him stirred, urging surrender, release. But in his heart, the fragile ember of hope still burned. "I will not bargain with darkness," he said finally, voice low but unwavering. "Cadia may fall, but I will not sell its soul." The envoy's laughter echoed through the chamber, cold and hollow. "Then prepare to watch your world burn." As the transmission ended, Varus turned to Kira, resolve hardening like forged adamantium. The shadows gather, but so must we. For Cadia, for the Emperor, we fight until the last breath. Outside, the dying sun cast long shadows over a world on the brink of oblivion. The ashes of Casimirak still smouldered beneath a bleak iron-grey sky, the fortress now a shattered monument to resilience and ruin. Commander Rael Varus paced the remnants of the command chamber, each step a heavy echo in the hollow silence. The siege had fractured more than walls. It had cleaved loyalties, trust, and the very spirit of Cadia itself. Across the fractured council table, Colonel Redden sat with a newfound dominance, his posture regal and unyielding. Where once he had been the shadowed adversary, now he strode with the quiet confidence of a man who had seized the moment others faltered in. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Varus with an unspoken challenge. "Commander," Redden began, voice smooth as polished ceramite, "Cadia's future demands decisive leadership. Your burdens have clouded your judgment. It is time for new blood to steer the fortress from ruin." Varus's lips thinned. "And you believe yourself the man for such a charge? A man who sows discord while our enemies tighten their grip?" Redden's smile was a blade concealed within silk. "Discord is the forge upon which new empires are born. The old must burn so the new may rise." Lieutenant Kira Dawn watched the exchange, a storm of conflict brewing in her eyes. The fracture between commander and colonel had grown beyond political rivalry. It was a battle for the soul of Cadia, where every whispered word carried the weight of betrayal. Commissar Janel Marik's voice cut through the tension like a bolt of ceramite. "Enough. We stand at the precipice of oblivion. Infighting will be our undoing." Varus nodded, though his gaze remained fixed on Redden. "We are united only if we choose to be. But make no mistake, Cadia's fate is not decided by ambition alone." Redden rose, his figure imposing despite the ruins surrounding them. "Then decide, Commander. Will you lead us into darkness, or will you step aside and let the fortress live?" The words hung heavy, a challenge and a curse intertwined. As Redden exited, the silence that followed was suffocating. Kira stepped closer to Varus, voice low but fierce. "He's not just a rival. He's a force tearing this place apart." Varus's eyes, ancient and weary, met hers. "Then we must face him, not just as enemies, but as fragments of a broken world." Outside, the storm clouds gathered anew, lightning fracturing the sky in jagged tears. The fortress trembled beneath the weight of choices made in shadow, the path forward shrouded in doubt and the lingering scent of betrayal. The rival had ascended, but the war for Cadia's soul was far from over. The siege had become a crucible, melting the iron will of Casimirak's defenders into something unrecognizable, fractured, raw, and burning with desperation. Commander Rael Varus felt the weight of centuries press upon him as the fortress's walls trembled under the relentless assault. But it was not the enemy's weapons that threatened to break him. It was the fractures within his own ranks. The war room, once a place of calculated strategy and cold discipline, now echoed with raised voices and bitter accusations. Colonel Redden's faction grew bolder. Their calls for Varus's removal no longer whispered, but shouted. Loyalty twisted into suspicion, and the defenders' unity crumbled like brittle stone. Lieutenant Kira Dawn stood between the factions, her hands trembling as she sought to bridge a chasm that seemed to widen with every passing day. "We must stand as one," she implored, voice breaking through the cacophony. "If we fall divided, Cadia falls with us." But the words found little purchase. Redden's reply was sharp, a blade meant to wound as much as to lead. Unity demands sacrifice. Sometimes that sacrifice is a leader unwilling to change. Varas remained silent, his eyes heavy with the burden of immortality, a curse that allowed him to witness endless cycles of betrayal and loss. Memories of faces long gone haunted him. Comrades fallen in battle, friends who had turned to darkness, and the ghosts of mistakes that could never be undone. The commander's voice finally cut through the storm, low and steady. I have borne this burden for centuries, not to see Cadia broken by its own blood. A sudden explosion rocked the fortress, shaking the walls and sending dust cascading from the ceilings. Alarms blared as emergency lights flickered to life. Outside, the enemy renewed their assault with ferocious intensity. Varas turned to Kira. Prepare the defenders. Tonight, we fight not just for stone and soil, but for the soul of Cadia. As the defenders rallied, Commissar Marek strode through the ranks, her voice a clarion call. Steel your hearts. The Emperor's light guides us even in this darkness. Yet, beneath the courage, a quiet despair lingered. The breaking point was near, and the fortress, like its defenders, teetered on the edge of ruin. The walls of Casamirek shuddered under the hammer of 1,000 engines of war. The night sky, once vast and indifferent, now boiled with fire and smoke, casting a hellish glow upon the battered fortress. Commander Rael Varas stood at the forefront of the last line of defense, the weight of his immortal burden pressing down like the dying stars themselves. Around him, the remnants of Cadia's defenders moved with grim determination, worn, bloodied, but unyielding. Lieutenant Kira Dorn's voice carried above the din, rallying the troops with fierce resolve. Hold the line, for every fallen brother and sister, for the Emperor and Cadia. The enemy surged forward like a tidal wave of corruption. Warp-tainted abominations and corrupted war machines, their twisted forms illuminated by the flickering eldritch light of the Eye of Terror. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and burning flesh, and every breath was a battle against despair. Commander Varas's gaze met that of Colonel Reedon, their rivalry now a bitter thing left unspoken, as both men fought side by side in the crucible of destruction. Betrayal, ambition, and mistrust had been set aside, the fate of a world balanced on a knife's edge. The clash was brutal, the fortress's stones stained with the blood of heroes and traitors alike. Varas wielded his ancient blade with a grace born of centuries, each strike a prayer against oblivion. Yet within his heart, the shadow of the pact whispered, a haunting promise of escape from the endless cycle of war. Amid the chaos, Kira fought fiercely, her resolve tempered by the knowledge that this night might be their last. She caught Varas's eye and nodded, a silent vow that whatever came, they would stand together. As dawn approached, the siege reached its climax. The fortress's defences faltered, walls crumbled, and the enemy poured through the breaches. But the defenders held fast in the heart of Casamirek, a bastion of hope amid the encroaching darkness. Commander Varas, wounded but unyielding, raised his blade toward the rising sun, voice low but resolute. Let Cadia's sacrifice be remembered, not as defeat, but as defiance. The dying sun cast long shadows over the shattered world, the echoes of battle fading into a solemn silence. The last stand had been made, and though the fortress fell, its spirit endured, etched forever in the stars. The sky above Cadia was ablaze, a tapestry of fire and ash woven against the eternal void. The fortress world, once a shining bastion of the Imperium's might, now lay engulfed in a brutal conflagration, its scars deep and bleeding, its fate hanging by a thread of smouldering hope. Commander Rael Varas moved through the ruins of Casamirac, each step heavy with the weight of loss and the silence of the fallen. The air was thick with the scent of burnt ceramite and spilled blood, a grim testament to the fierce struggle that had racked the world beneath the eye of terror's baleful gaze. Around him, survivors gathered, soldiers, priests, and those few who still clung to faith amidst the ruin. Their faces were etched with exhaustion, sorrow, and a fierce defiance that refused to be extinguished. Lieutenant Kira Dawn approached, her eyes reflecting the flickering fires that danced like dying stars across the shattered horizon. "Commander," she said softly, voice steady despite the despair, "Cadia may be lost, but our fight is not over. The Imperium still stands. We still stand." Varus nodded, his gaze distant but resolute. "Immortality is a curse when the world you protect crumbles beneath your feet. I have watched centuries pass, empires rise and fall. Yet here I remain, a sentinel bound by blood and oath." A faint, mournful wind stirred the ashes at their feet, carrying with it the echoes of sacrifice and the ghosts of those who had given all. Varas raised his gaze to the sky, where the first light of dawn struggled to pierce the lingering smoke. "The fire that burns Cadia now will forge new legends," he said, voice low and heavy with prophecy. "From these ashes, the Imperium will rise again. But the cost is written in the silence of the fallen." Kira stepped beside him, her hand briefly touching his arm. "A silent vow amidst the ruin. Then we carry their memory. Their sacrifice will not be forgotten." As the fires raged on, swallowing the night and heralding a new, uncertain dawn, Varus's thoughts turned inward, to the pact he bore, the betrayal endured, and the price of endless war. In the distance, the eye of terror pulsed, an ever-present reminder that darkness waits patiently, that the war for souls is eternal. But for now, amidst the fire over Cadia, a fragile hope endured, a spark waiting to ignite anew. The world lay silent beneath a sky smeared with the bruised colours of dawn, where the ashes of Casamirac drifted like spectral snow across the shattered plains of Cadia. The fortress had fallen, its proud walls reduced to ruin, its mighty halls silent save for the whispers of ghosts. And yet, amid the desolation, the heartbeat of memory throbbed fiercely, a quiet defiance against oblivion. Commander Rael Varas stood alone atop the remnants of a broken battlement, the weight of immortality pressing heavy upon his shoulders. Centuries had carved lines into his face, each scar a testament to battles waged and sacrifices made, yet none so profound as this, the death of the world he had sworn to protect. His gaze wandered over the smouldering landscape, where twisted wreckage and shattered stones lay tangled with the fallen. The scent of burned ceramite and scorched earth filled the air, a pungent reminder of the price paid in blood and steel. Varus's voice was a low murmur, barely carried on the wind. Immortality is no gift, but a chain. To live while worlds die, to bear witness to endless cycles of war and ruin. It is a torment few can fathom. The pact that had bound him to eternity, the shadowed bargain struck in desperation, felt heavier now than ever before. Each breath was a reminder of the price exacted, the endless solitude of an undying soul amid the fleeting lives of those he once called kin. Lieutenant Kira Dawn approached quietly, her footsteps soft on the cracked stone. "Commander," she said, her voice steady yet filled with sorrow, "the Imperium mourns Cadia, but it does not forget. Your sacrifice theirs. It will be the forge of new hope." Varus turned, the ancient weariness in his eyes meeting her unwavering resolve. "Hope," he repeated, is a fragile flame. It can warm or consume. We must guard it fiercely, lest it be snuffed out. He reached into the folds of his battered cloak, producing a small shard of ceramite, the last remnant of the fortress's heartstone. It pulsed faintly, a dim echo of the power that had once held Cadia safe. As long as this remains, he said, so too does the memory of what was lost. Empires rise and fall, but the ashes remember. Kira nodded, stepping beside him. Together they stood, overlooking the vast expanse, silent witnesses to an end and a beginning intertwined. Beyond the horizon, the eye of terror churned, a looming reminder that the war was eternal, the darkness unyielding. Yet in the quiet between storms, the embers of sacrifice glowed, waiting for the moment when they would ignite once more.